Yeah. So, hi. Thank you everyone for inviting me. Great opportunity. I heard a little bit about this. Is the idea of this group is to just get to know people before the bad day happens, which is a really good idea. And thank you for the interest and want to know more about what we do in the Val world. So, as I said, I'm a voluntary agency liaison. I'm one of two out here in FEMA Region 8. Region 8 covers Colorado, Utah, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. Um, we work with voluntary agencies, volunteer groups. As you know, volunteer groups are crucial for the disaster process and the disaster recovery. And long after a big event, after a bad day, um, after the fire trucks and the emergency vehicles go away, there's still that local component, those local volunteer organizations uh, that are going to be around for the long haul to help people with their recovery. And so what we do in the battle world is we serve as a liaison to the federal government, but we also try to help the community come together and decide whether or not and how they want to form a long-term recovery group. When I say long-term recovery group, do you folks know what I mean?
Refresh
Nope.
our memories.
Sure. In order to describe what a long-term recovery group is, I like to tell a story. Story you may have heard before, and if so, please bear with me. So, a long time ago, in a land far, far away, this group of travelers was coming back home from this long journey, and they're very tired, they're very hungry, they don't have much food with them, they don't have anything with them, and they come across this small village by a river, and the guide for this group says, all right, everyone, break out the cooking equipment, set the table, we're going to make some stone soup. Gather some water, gather some stones, we're going to make stone soup. And the traveler's like, my dude, we don't have any food, what are you talking about? So just don't worry about it, I'm going to go ask these people over here. So the guide goes to different houses in the village and he knocks on the doors and says, hey, we're traveling, we've come this long way, we're very tired, we don't have any food with us, we want to make dinner, do you have anything that you can share with us? And the people say, oh, sorry, we don't really know you, it's been a hard year, we don't have much that we can share, you got to get out of here. I'm like, that's fine, but we're just letting you know, we're making stone soup and you're welcome to come have dinner with us if you'd like. And so he goes around and he gets the same response everywhere and still inviting people to come to the table. And eventually the villagers started talking to each other like, I'm kind of curious, I want to see where this is going, because those people are down there by the river gathering these stones, putting them in the pot of boiling water, and they're looks like they're getting ready to dinner, but they said they didn't have anything to eat. And so the guide's out there by the fire. He's like, oh, it's perfect, exactly what we need. But man, we should have like one potato. I think one potato. I think that would do it. I think that would make this stone soup. So villagers, they hear this, and one guy in the back's like, I kind of want to see where they're going with this. So yeah, here's one potato. You can have one potato. Cut up, put it. Perfect. It's exactly what we needed. Exactly what we needed. But man, we just had one carrot. Just one carrot to go along with this. I think this soup might be even better than the soup we made for the king last week. And now the villagers are really curious. They're like, these guys cooked for the king last week, now they're going to cook for us? So like, yeah, okay, here's a carrot, maybe an onion, a little celery, a little salt, pepper, meat comes together. One by one, the ingredients come together. They cook the soup, they feed the travelers, they feed the villagers, everyone has a good time. The reason I like to tell that story is because that's exactly what we do in the volunteer world and the voluntary agency liaison world. We know that not one organization has all the resources that are necessary for a community to move on with a recovery. But when we can pool information, pool resources, and work together and collaborate and follow the 4 C's that National Voad sets out, communication, collaboration, cooperation, coordination, then we can do something awesome. And so what we do in the Val world specifically is, of course, when a disaster happens, we're on all these different phone calls, these coordination calls, we're looking at the different volunteer activities that are going around, who's feeding, who's sheltering, who's doing chainsaw work, who's leading volunteer efforts, who's picking up sticks, all the different stuff that's going on. We try to make contact with all these different groups and find out, one, what are you doing? How long? Two, how long do you plan on doing it? And three, what other resources do you need to continue to do this? And also, are you also talking to these other guys down the road who are doing some similar type work? Because we want to make sure that all of the different efforts are being coordinated and effectively. We don't want to see a situation where your volunteer base camp you have set up is functioning one way and you're able to manage, like say, 50 volunteers, and then some Sunday morning at around 11 o'clock, 300 people show up and you can't handle it because it's beyond what you had originally planned to do. I want to make sure that you know the other volunteer coordinators in the area, so that if you do have this kind of event happen, then you know where to send people so that their skills can be put to use and that they can have a good volunteer experience. And I use that example because that's exactly what happened to me one day many years ago, as I was running a volunteer site, and 300 people showed up out of the blue. What we weren't expecting them, but we knew some of the other volunteer groups in the area, so we were able to coordinate that and get those people effectively sent to where they needed to go. And a part of that is also looking at what is going to be the long term, what's gonna happen long term. And by long term, I mean not just like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. We're talking like 6 months, a year, 2 years out from the event. Who's going to be around? What organizations are going to be around in that long-term period that can help the community recover? Because there may be homes that have been destroyed that need to be rebuilt. People may need help relocating to different areas. There's all sorts of different stuff that goes on in long-term recovery, and we try to help those different community stakeholders come together and form a structure, form an organization that can be effective in helping the disaster survivors meet their recovery goals. And that is typically what we call a long-term, done through what we call a long-term recovery group. Now, the slide that I have up here is what's called the sequence of delivery. And that is the order in which people typically receive disaster assistance. So if there is a federally declared disaster event for individual assistance, and Aaron wanted me to make sure that I talk about PA a little bit. I'll get to PA in public assistance a little bit. But if there's a federally declared disaster event for individual assistance, then this is the sequence that people will typically follow. So it starts off with that with the voluntary organizations, with that mass care, that feeding, that sheltering, emergency assistance. Think of like your Salvation Armies, your Red Crosses, that immediate, just getting people fed and making sure that they're in a safe place. The next category of assistance that people typically receive is from insurance and their own personal resources, what they have. And this is where probably a lot to most of their assistance is going to come from insurance. We'll talk about the FEMA programs in a minute, but FEMA programs are not designed to replace what you would receive from assistance, but it is meant to help provide some assistance for your home. That's why insurance is very important, because there's a cap on how much people are eligible to receive from FEMA, and it's never going to come close to what people are eligible to receive from FEMA. So let's say that the home is destroyed and you receive $20,000 from your insurance. Now let's say that let's not worry about that one. Let's say the home is destroyed and you receive $20,000 or damage, and you receive $20,000 from insurance. The maximum amount of assistance that FEMA can provide this fiscal year is $37,900. So if you've received $20,000 from insurance, FEMA is only going to be able to provide 17,900 because FEMA assistance can't exceed 37.9, and it takes into account what you receive from insurance. So that's why it's important that people go through their insurance first. They can register with FEMA, yes, which is that next portion, because people may receive something like temporary housing or some home repair funds. So they may be able to stay a couple nights in a hotel or something. But a lot of times insurance will cover that expense too. And FEMA by law cannot duplicate a service that another organization is providing. So if your homeowner's insurance or renter's insurance provides for ALE, additional living expenses, then you won't be eligible for receiving temporary housing assistance from FEMA, for example. And now let's say your home is damaged or destroyed and you receive $50,000 from your insurance company, then you wouldn't be eligible for any of that from FEMA. So part of the process is when people register with FEMA, FEMA is going to ask for their insurance determination letter. And people have up to 18 months to provide that insurance determination letter. They have up to 18 months to submit that to FEMA, but they have to register for FEMA assistance within 30 days of the declared event. So this is a situation that we see sometimes, is that people are arguing with their insurance. Insurance doesn't want to pay out as much as what they think they're owed. And so while they're dealing with that, they don't register for FEMA assistance. And so the registration period closes and they're not eligible for anything when they potentially could have been. That's why it's important that people register within that registration period. Now, a lot of times that registration period is extended, maybe extended to 30 days at a time, but that is not something that people should count on. It doesn't happen all the time, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. So the next
Matthew, before you
Yes.
move on, so is that something that each individual homeowner must do on their own? Just go on the FEMA website and do this at themselves? Because I know for municipalities or counties, they do that through the county, then the state, then the federal. But for individuals, they do that. Do they have to wait for a declaration to be done and then they just apply individually? So we would, as our Voad partners, we could help those in our areas understand this a little bit better, how individuals would do it.
Excellent question. Yes. So yes, households have to register individually, and it has to be in one of the declared counties. So when you get a federal declaration, the entire state is not eligible for assistance. It's only the people that reside within those designated counties that are eligible for assistance. And there's a couple different ways that you can register. There's an app that you can get on your phone. It's the FEMA app that basically takes you to the mobile version of disasterassistance.gov. That's the website that people can go to, disasterassistance.gov. And I think FEMA.gov has a button on there that'll take you there as well. But they can register online that way, or they can call the FEMA line, the hotline, or they can go to what's called a DRC, a Disaster Recovery Center. And these are like little shops that FEMA goes in and sets up. And it might be like in an abandoned used car parking lot, or a Sears, or a church parking lot, or something like that. It's a spot that's set up where people can come in. They can bring in their documentation, whatever they need. They can speak with someone about their case. They can do all that in person. And there's also another option called DSA, Disaster Survivor Assistance. By the way, if I start using acronyms or initialisms, like stop me, because I'm a Fed and we tend to do that. We live in that world. But the DSA teams, the Disaster Survivor Assistance teams, are are people that go around door to door in an affected area, and they will knock on doors and say, "Hi, my name's so and so. I'm with FEMA with a survivor assistance team. Want to know if you've registered with FEMA yet? If you need assistance." And they will actually do registration and intake at people's doorsteps. And sometimes the DSA folks might even go to like special events, like if there's a community fair or a public information event, we might send. Is that a question? Hearing none. They might send a DSA team out to like a special community event or something, or a specific location where they know people are going to be. There's going to be a lot of foot traffic, and if people need to register or something like that, they can do it that way.
So Matt, then overall, just in a nutshell, their designated area, their city or their county has had an emergency declaration, a formal emergency declaration by their mayor or their county commissioners or even their governor, or if it's a national one, that would be a presidential one. And then once its official declaration has been established and you live within that area, then we direct people to the FEMA app or the FEMA website for this particular assistance, but they have to apply within 30 days of the declaration.
Yeah. And
Okay.
It's by a county. We declare areas by county. That's how FEMA does it.
Yeah, and one little minor difference is it has to be a presidentially declared disaster in order for FEMA to get involved. If the governor can declare a state of emergency in a county or a municipality, and that opens up additional resources for that municipality, typically public assistance, which is when government pays government to do government type things. And then the individual assistance is when government pays individuals directly for recovery. And pretty much only FEMA has an IA program. I don't know of any state that has an IA program.
Colorado does on the books.
On the books, exactly. Yeah, it's
on paper they have one, but not really. Yeah. So individual households need to register, and it can be renters. Renters can register with FEMA, and they can be provided with some assistance, but they're not going to get, typically, renters are not going to get like home repair funds. They might be able to receive some funds for like personal property, but like any damage to the home, that's typically the landlord's responsibility.
I think it's also worth mentioning that a typical FEMA check is somewhere on the order of $3,000 to $5,000 on average. SBA loans can be much higher. They can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on a range of a range of factors.
That's exactly where we're going next. Yes.
Well, and Matt, then is it similar to? I mean, I filled out forms for municipal disaster. So is it similar for these individual assistant forms? You have to have pictures. Do you have to have before and after, or just the after pictures and then the invoices of cleaning? And is it similar in what is required? Because I think that's one thing, as each of us may do some training in our individual states to kind of know, at least be familiar with it, so we can tell people prior to an incident, make sure you document this way, so that when they teach people to go forward with the forms, that they have done it correctly, because there's nothing worse than filling out the form to find out you didn't save something correctly.
Yeah, there is. And I also want to make sure that I know that it's got to be an individual assistance IA declared disaster, because the most common type of disaster that is presidentially declared is for public assistance. And just because you're declared for public assistance doesn't mean you're going to get declared for individual assistance. So yeah, FEMA may be coming to town, but it's a couple guys that are like structural engineers that are coming around to do a survey of like a utility lines or something like that.
How do you know if they've because usually like the news media will just say disaster has been declared, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
had several in Utah this year. So how do you know if it's just for this year? So how do you know if it's just for that local government assistance or it's for the individual assistance? Or do those who have the authority to do so, whether it's the county commission or governor, whoever, do they understand the distinction between the two? I mean, they should, but they don't always verbalize it? And if they don't know, maybe that's something we could help educate them on.
Yeah, I can't speak to what elected officials know or don't know, but yeah, we publicize the heck out of it. We make sure that our people they're putting stuff in newspapers, they're on radio, they're on television, they're on social media. We do absolutely everything that we can to make sure that everyone in the community we'll go to the grocery store, the library, bars. We'll put stuff at coffee shops. We'll put flyers up on the walls and on the doors saying exactly where to go if you need help, how to register, the phone number, the website, the locations where the centers are going to be, the hours that they're going to operate. We're going to be publicizing a lot of all this information all over the place. It's very hard to miss.
Okay, so for all of us, we're all over the nation. We should then be familiar with our local VAL for our region or for our state, so that we
Yes.
are. So if we have any question on if it is a declaration of just government services or this individual assistance, we could call and ask them, and they would be able to tell us.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
this is a good segue too. We'll get back to the SBA stuff in a second here in the sequence of delivery, but part of what we do, and I'm going to try to stop sharing this, and I'm going to share a different screen, which
And while you're doing that, I know I had a couple of questions, couple of things that I wanted to go over, just that we run into as that we run into. Let's see if I had that list here. So we went over the difference between PA and IA, public assistance versus individual assistance, and then hours. So one of the things we hear over and over again is, "Give me all your hours, give me all your hours, give me all your hours." So so Matt, I'm going to tell you my understanding, and you tell me if it's close or correct me. So with public assistance, the federal government gives money to the state government, but according to the Stafford Act, the state government has to pay 25% of that back to the feds. However, they can offset the amount that they have to pay with volunteer hours, but the caveat is that this is all PA, right? Public assistance or government type activities, clearing streets, turning the lights back on, fixing the park, getting right of ways clear, and the fire station up and running, for example. So those are all government type things, public assistance. So volunteer hours for public assistance count against that cost share that the state has to pay back to the feds. However, it is my understanding that once you enter private property and you're helping grandma, that is individual assistance. It's no longer public assistance, with some, very Byzantine exceptions to exceptions and things like that. But for the most part, once you enter private property, the volunteer hours no longer count against the FEMA cost share for public assistance. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, the one thing that I would disagree with you on is that it's not that they're paying back the federal government, they're paying the cost of the project.
Okay, yeah, sorry. A cost share, yes.
Yeah, because I'm not a public assistance guy, so I can't speak too much about it, but what they do is the state and the county and FEMA, they work together to create what they call project worksheets. And it's like fixing the water line, fixing the bridge, whatever it is. And then there's a cost associated with that. And volunteer hours, if they're collected because if those volunteer hours, that activity can be attributed or demonstrate a benefit to that particular project, then those hours can count towards the state and locals cost share.
Got it.
Yes,
They're
so it's typically known as a match.
Yeah.
And so if you're, for those of you who work with the local emergency managers, they will ask you, especially if they're, I mean, we're all representing our ecclesiastical positions. And so they'll ask, you have a whole stake that gives, you know, you have 500 people show up to do sandbags, right? And they'll say, okay, how many hours did you do? And who were the people? And you need to make sure that they filled out the appropriate FEMA forms so that their hours and their equipment and their expertise is counted against the match. So if it's a $10 million project and it's a 29% match, and you have those 500 people show up, each one of them is designated with a certain cost. And if they have their backhoe or they have a specialized, you know, a skill set, they get a different number based on the FEMA formula. And it's very, very important. Recently, I was talking to our area authority about this because I serve as a local, I mean, I am the local emergency manager for my city, and I told him how important this is, that the church capture these hours. And so they are actually working on something that will go down the ecclesiastical lines to showcase that we do want to have that collected in ecclesiastical ways. But until that happens, as Voad reps, you might want to make sure that those that you have relationships with are aware of this requirement, so that if a big disaster is there, that the hours that you have worked so hard to get those volunteers there are actually counted. And then you can give those to your local emergency manager. So when they sign up for the public assistance, all of those hours are then used towards that city's match.
Right. The nuance here that I also want to get across is because as a church, we'll do two things. We'll help government out doing government type things like sandbagging, for example. And that's a government type activity. We also help individuals out. And when we go help grandma, the need to report those hours is far less. It isn't going to save local government any money. Now, you can still keep track of them, you can still report them, that's fine, but understanding that nuance can be helpful when you're trying to wrap yourself around the axle, getting documentation that doesn't exist.
But grandma's, if you're helping a grandma, she may need someone to take pictures and also to say what work was done, because there are things that church members might come in and muck out the basement before someone professional comes in and redoes all the electrical, right? And so those things need to be documented that was done, whether it was a paid or a voluntary effort on her behalf. So it's still important to maybe consider all of those different types of volunteer help that you give individuals as well.
And I would say that it's still important to help to document the hours that you and what you did to help out Grandma Smith, because that does help tell the story of how this disaster has impacted this community and all the work that's been going on to help provide relief and provide assistance. And you're gonna want that, because in the long term, you're gonna want to be telling your story to potential funders and donors. And the more documentation that you have of saying, hey, this is all the work that has been done so far, and this is all the work that we still have yet to do. And you want to be able to tell that story effectively. So I still say that it's important to document those hours, even if it's not going to be going towards the cost match. It's still important to tell. And for another reason too, and this gets to how a disaster gets declared. So once there's a request for a declaration, bad day happens, and the governor writes a letter requesting a federal declaration, even if it's PA or if it's IA. Part of our role as VALs is to validate what's been going on already. So even before the disaster is federally declared, someone like me is going to reach out to the local Voad chair and ask for the information that I'm showing in this email right now. We want to know how many people have been sheltered, how many people maybe provided emergency medical care, how many volunteers have engaged, what kind of activities they're doing, If there's hygiene kits or cleanup kits or gift cards or sandbags or anything like that, we want to know all that information because that goes to help support the request for the declaration. So even before it's declared, we're still going to be asking for that information. And it doesn't have to be 100% correct, but anything that helps us tell the story of what's been going on and why this declaration is needed, that's what we're after.
So again, Matt, then as those of us who are the Voad representatives, some of us serve in our state Voad leadership, others do not. But does the Voad state president then gather this from all of the partners and give it to the local VAL, or does the VAL contact the state president? Which way does it go, or does it go both ways?
The way it works,
Well, actually, what I found that that's often our role. The state president, frankly, is not going to have a clue what a VAL is most of the time.
No,
And
I just meant us as Voad
Yeah.
reps. Do we contact the state VAL, or does the state VAL contact the state Voad president? And then we, whether we're in leadership or not, we supply our hours to our state Voad chair to be able to give that to our state VAL, is what I'm
Yeah,
asking.
Can I answer that, Carrie?
Yeah.
As past president of Utah State Voad, when we had disasters, as Utah State Voad president, I would have Sheila, our secretary, send out an email to our partners. For example, the 100-year flood in Moab. If any of you, our partners, have participated, please get your hours to me. I collect the hours and then I send them as president of Utah State Voad to Ken Crowdy, our Utah State Val, and then he will get them on to Matt and Brooks.
Yep. And I've seen it also before that bad days going on, and I might wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, state counterpart and state Voad chair, are you guys going to do a call? And then 10 minutes later, there's an email that gets sent out that says, hey, we're doing a call at 2:00, everybody. So, yeah.
And, just a side note, I know that Brooks had shared with me something that I think it was South Dakota had put together when they had their derecho. For Carrie is a member of our Utah State Voad. So our Utah Voad does not have something to collect that. So presently, we the president asks for that information. And if we can figure out a way, I know the gal from South Dakota, I think she was with Salvation Army, but she had the digital chops to put together a matrix. And I will have full disclosure. I did not have that educational chops to put that together. So I would send out the email and ask for the information. And most of our VOADs collect that individually. Like, for example, Team Rubicon became really good at that during COVID. And they collect all of their information on projects that they do.
So for us as VOAD leaders representing the church, it would be our responsibility then to contact whichever stake was asked to participate or give those volunteer hours. They would give them to us as the VOAD reps for our state, and then we would transfer that to our VOAD state chair, who would then take it from there. I just want to make sure that our group here understands what our role is in collecting, because that really is one of the number one things the church does, is boots on the ground, and how important that is. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that that was our role in this collection.
Yes, and Aaron, maybe you have input on this. Collecting those church hours. I know that's something we've been doing in Utah, is trying to get that FEMA form. I just don't know that it's shared with all of those stake presidents. Yeah. Are you familiar with the terminology when we say stake presidents, Matt?
State presidents, like state VOAD chairs, VOAD presidents?
No.
So inside the church, a local congregation is called a ward. Many wards make a stake. It's kind of like an archdiocese, and the president of the stake is called a stake president. So like stake in the ground. So that's an ecclesiastical.
As opposed to a steakhouse.
Right. Yes.
and the stake president is over like probably 6 to 7 congregational geographical areas of congregations.
And then to answer your question, so I found that most of the time in most parts of the country, we're pretty good at collecting hours, but only in bulk. You know, we'll know that we had 425 volunteers and they all worked about 8 hours. And then for purposes of telling the story and explaining what we're doing, that's sufficient. If we need to document, though, what we actually did, let's say we were doing, cleaning out a fire station versus Grandma Smith, or doing sandbagging versus private tree work, you need a lot more detail. We're generally pretty bad at that because those forms don't usually get all the way down and we don't document it very well.
Yeah, but for the initial, just to get the declaration, you're entirely right. The bulk is sufficient, because I'm not the part of the request that I work on. I'm not going to go into, here's the volunteer list, here's the sign-in sheet. I'm not getting there. I'm just saying, like, 400 volunteers put in 2,000 hours doing this kind of stuff. Real short. So bulk is fine for just getting the declaration. But,
Right, for getting the declaration, but you definitely have to do it for your emergency manager of your city or your county, because they have to have the specific names and addresses, etc.
yeah.
So otherwise FEMA doesn't count it. And that can be really disheartening when you find out you have the bulk number and they needed individuals and you can't go back and find out which 425 people showed up.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah, and so, like, other example of this is, like, in the Boulder fire that we had last year. We the Boulder County set up a donation center. It was like I forget the name of the store, but it was like a department store in a mall that was empty. And so the county rented it out, and that was truckloads of stuff. We're bringing all sorts of donations of clothes and food and household items and goods and stuff like that, toys and bikes and hand tools, even all sorts of different stuff was coming in. And the Adventists were the ones that were running the site, and they were very detailed in their information that they were collecting and the volunteer activities that they're doing. So one of their specialties is donations management. And because of all the, that's a PA activity, is donations management, can fall under PA. And so because of the good work that they were doing, that was able to pay for the cost of the donation center. So even though the county was kind of having to spend money up front, they were able to cover all those costs by the volunteers and donations that were coming in, because they were so well documented. So
I'd like to go ahead and do a time check. So it's about 6:45. Were there any other, like, major points that you'd like to hit, Matt?
Sure. Let me hit this 1, 2, 3 maybe. Okay, so back to our sequence of delivery that we were talking about earlier. A next big chunk that people can get. So after the people registered for FEMA, they may be kicked over to the SBA, the Small Business Administration. This is a point that I actually do kind of want to hammer home a little bit, is that it's an imperfect system, because we're taking people that registered from one agency and then we hand them over to the SBA. And this is where people run into a lot of trouble, because they say to themselves, why would I go to the SBA? I'm not a business. And why do you want to give me a loan? I can't afford a loan. So I'm going to put everything on my credit card. And that's where people get tripped up a lot, because they don't want to take a $200,000 loan for 20 years at like a 1 or 3% interest rate, because they think they can't afford that. But the loan that you get from SBA is going to be between like 1 and 5% interest rate, whereas MasterCard is happy to charge you 20%, and then you have to pay monthly. So that's where a lot of people get caught up, is that they get over to the SBA and they don't fill out the SBA loan application, because all the reasons that I've stated. And if they get denied, if they fill out the application and they get denied the SBA loan, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because then that kicks them back over to FEMA for our additional programs, which can cover things like personal property, transportation, and some group flood insurance policies. So that's a step where people get really tripped up, and that's where a lot of money is frankly left on the table because they don't go through the process. They get confused and they just stop. And the last stop along the way is the voluntary organizations again, and the long-term recovery group. And this is that stone soup that I was talking about earlier. Once the voluntary organizations and the local stakeholders can pull together and pool those resources, information, we can get everyone together. Maybe we get some case management. We can talk a lot more about case management, what it is and how it works. But once case management is in place and people, survivors are working with a case manager to develop a recovery plan, and they can identify what's needed to move on with their recovery, they can present that case to an unmet needs roundtable. And depending on the funding, the priorities of that long-term recovery group, that unmet needs roundtable can fund those additional unmet needs and help people establish their new normal. So that was the bulk of the things that I wanted to talk about. Checking my notes.
Maybe we could move into any questions and then spend the rest of the time kind of doing the networking thing.
If you have a question, just raise your hand either physically or I guess, Matt, stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody. And then if you just raise your hand and then, or do the hand on the reactions. But Robert, your hand is up. Oh, you got to unmute. Robert, unmute before you talk.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
SBA, real quick. That can be handled at any bank. Is that correct? I mean, pretty much every bank handles SBA.
I don't know about banks, but the SBA sets up shop at like disaster recovery centers. And if you register with FEMA and we transfer you over to SBA, then and you might be eligible for a loan, they will mail you a SBA loan application. I haven't heard of people going to banks for the SBA, but SBA sets up their own shops, and they're oftentimes.
I've always gone to the bank for SBA loans, but
I've never had one before, so I don't know.
Yeah,
Certain banks, like during COVID, when we were doing a lot of SBA loans for COVID relief, certain banks will advertise that they're doing it, but not all of them do. You just specific ones. Yeah. Any other questions?
They typically set up shop with us in our DRCs, or they might set up their own DRC. I forget what they call it, but their own type of shop, storefront that they set up in disasters.
Matt, Lisa requested that in addition to your slide that you also send your stone soup story in an email, and maybe that other email that you shared that we can read a little bit more.
Absolutely.
So those 3 items. Okay, any other questions? I guess it was very thorough, Matt. So,
thank you.
I think one of the things that those of us who serve in this Voad role, sometimes we're not always sure, we work with the partners, but we're not always sure of what we do and who we represent. And it's good for us to recognize so that when we talk with our internal partners, those in our own ecclesiastical world, that we can then share with them what we need to know to then present it on our state level. So we appreciate that.
Something that was in the chat, I didn't mention it, and I'm sorry, but thank you, Aaron, because you are entirely correct. When people register for FEMA, a lot of times they will get a denial letter, and it is very important that people appeal when they get a denial letter. A lot of times people, they open the letter, they see, hey, you've been denied, they get frustrated, they throw it in the trash. Don't do that. Read it, because a lot of times it'll say things like, we need additional information, and it'll tell you what they need. what FEMA needs to continue to process the request. A lot of times it's the insurance determination letter, or it might be some additional documentation or samples of receipts or something. But once people, if people are denied FEMA assistance, don't accept that as the final answer. Appeal the decision and read the letter thoroughly and provide whatever documentation is needed. You can always request FEMA send you the documentation they have, or resend their correspondence. You can always ask them to send it again if people did throw it away. Oh, I don't have it anymore. You can call the helpline and ask them to send it to you again. It's very important. Thank you for
Great.
mentioning that.
Are there any other questions? If not, did we want to break out at all into small groups and share experiences, or just share some here? We're in a kind of a small group. Does anyone have an experience that they've had since last month that you would like to share with us?